looking for hope in a world that has lied to you about who you really are. Grown woman holding in story she needs to tell what God really wants you to do in this world. In his name, hope to break free from the shackles and the lies that have become your truth and put blinders on your eyes. You built walls around your heart, you have plugged up your ears. Get freedom to hope's what you need. It's in reach, wipe your tears, little girl. Hope is what she's thinking. Let Stacy speak hope to ya. She's bringing straight hope to ya. Hope is what she's bringing. Let Stacy speak hope to ya. Hope is what she's bringing. Listen closely and you'll see hope to ya. Yeah.
Welcome to Stacy Speaks Hope, the podcast that explores the lies that have kept your little girl bound. We trust the truth of God's word to offset the lies. I'm your host, Dr. Stacy. Get ready to be empowered to become the hope-filled woman God has called you to be. I'll share some of the lies that have held me back. If you hear something that you can relate to, drop a comment in the chat and we'll talk about it. Welcome back to Stacy Speaks Hope. Hey, how's your little girl? What's she doing? How's she feeling? Are you starting to see what's under the lies or under the behaviors that were tied to the lies that you didn't know about? Last episode, we talked about what it looked like in love relationships and friendships. The question continues. All the behaviors that I find myself looking at, wondering about, doing that have a thin thread. Some were boulders, some were ropes tied back to the lies, the lie of rejection. But really, there's so many little things that it's almost like spider veins. You have the big vein and then the little tiny veins that go out, all being fed by the same blood source. Let's look at today how those patterns show up in us trying new things, having that business, stepping into that ministry, writing that book, releasing that album, taking that new job, even going on that trip. There's still some conditioning, there's still some beliefs that we've hung on to. I look at my story. I was adventurous and tried new things, but when it came to doing things that I said I wanted to be an engineer, I said. Just even that one as a kid. But then the behavior, because this got in the way of, hey, I want to fit in and be like everybody else. I was nowhere near ready for the level of math that I needed to even begin to take the level of science and math classes. Physics took me out. I learned how to do word problems as a math major really well as a college student, because when those were being taught, or should have been taught, at 7th and 8th grade time when I was clowning, guess who wasn't learning those? Even back in elementary school. Why wasn't I learning? Because I was at school wondering what was going to happen in recess. This was a thread that followed. There was money attached to it. I lost the scholarship because a full ride scholarship because of one math class that I failed. Because of the way the teacher did the problems, I could not figure out how to solve them. I could not figure out how to produce the work. And it wasn't even that I didn't know it. I found out later, which I still talk about. It was the presentation. I took the same class over from a different teacher and I got an A because I did know the material, but the questions on the test were set up differently. God knew. that wasn't the path I would have been on. As an engineer, probably wouldn't have been happy after all that time and all that schoolwork. I like solving problems, but at that time that was the only job I knew that really honored that and gave a name to it. So of course things work out. Of course God knows all things and has control over all things. So there's no accidents, but I can see that my patterns, my behaviors, my beliefs, my reactions to inside, I was just afraid of being rejected. So it didn't ever enter my thoughts why I shouldn't, why I should focus on my learning, why I should be prepared to go to college. So, what's your thing? What have you noticed? Just in general, I see with my clients, with myself, when I was somebody's coaching client, when I first started out, the things that I do that work against the sabotage, the self sabotage, as it's called. I said I wanted to accomplish this. I've been talking about writing a book since 2008. I even have the title, I even have the chapter titles. What's that about? Why haven't I written it yet? Why haven't I just sat down and sat still? My mind is full of ideas. What am I afraid of? Why haven't I disciplined myself enough? Because there's something still inside that says, you don't really want to do that. Do it later. Do this instead. And we do that. And it's so easy to do that. Life has gotten so much more complicated and so many more distractions since 2008. That's when I had my kidney transplant. And it was a miraculous story. And I did write about it in an anthology. So I got to write a chapter. And as I was writing the chapter, of course, I wanted to write more. Having that 2,500 word limit made me really have to get that story really tight. As life would have it, I have more to add to the story along a medical diagnosis, but it just maybe wasn't the time. I certainly wasn't at the place to tell the story the way I believe God wants me to tell it or wanted me to tell it. I wouldn't have done that then. So I trust those factors, but I still ask the questions as you are asking the questions, as you are creating the path out of believing that the lies were the truth, about seeing ourselves in a way that is not who we are, not who we're meant to be, not who we're called to be, and most of all, not reaching the people that we're supposed to reach through our lives. The good thing of being a teacher, I go to places and I see people that were students either of mine or just at the school that are now grown up. And it's such a joy and a blessing to run into them and just have that connection. They remember me. They looked up to me, even if they weren't in my class. That's so special. And that reminds me of the number of lives that I touched knowingly and unknowingly. The same is true for every single one of us. People are always watching us. They're watching how we treat people. We're watching how we are with ourselves. They are watching how we are with our kids, our parents, our family members, our friends. Maybe they really want to be our friend and don't know how to approach us. The circumstances are different. If they're, if you're a manager and they're a manager in another department, but they're seeing how you treat people. And if it's different, it really leaves an impression on people. But the more healed we are, the more we show up in a healthy way. The journey that we're on is so important. We can't get it all at once. It didn't happen all at once. It's not going to be shifted all at once. So we can honor that and be gentle with ourselves in that. And at the same time, we can't just say, That's just the way I am. I'm going to stay like this. This happened to me, and all the women in my family are like this. So many people say that. And it's kind of out of pocket behavior. And so we justify it because other people we love do it. That don't make it right. And it's certainly, if we're the only Bible that some people ever read, and something's off so extreme or so make them question or make them feel really good. We have the choice. We have to make choices in our responses. We have to be clear enough in knowing how we feel before we react. Emotional intelligence is being that self aware, knowing, okay, when this happens, I can feel this way. Because there's not a lot of things that are very different that happen in our lives. When I'm in these spaces, aware of the space that I'm in, the environment I'm in, if I'm around these certain people, I tend to fall back to ways of reacting that maybe weren't the way I choose to react today, or I've learned another way to react. There's a process that is so heartfelt and so deep. At the end of the day, if we're not being able to stop and just take a quick breath, being in a fast reaction is a form of a trauma response, even because we can't even stop and breathe or stop and think. We just got to jump and I got to protect myself right now, immediately. That's an emotional trigger because we're so afraid of what could happen next. We want to be in control of what happens next. It's a sign that there's still something underneath the surface. It may be way buried deep that we can't even name it to give to God as our process unfolds. But we can trust and believe that little by little, the analogy of the iceberg, we're dealing with what's way up at the top. And it stems from something that's way buried, layers deep, layers of ice on top of layers of ice on top of layers of ice before it even breaks the surface to be seen. Know that's a real example of how things are inside of us. And of course, even with icebergs melting, they're not going to melt overnight. They're not going to melt in one day. Put my two thoughts together. So as we start to dig into those places and ask God to show us those places, what am I holding on to? I mentioned earlier in the episodes that this is a series of courageous conversations. Do we have the courage to ask those hard questions of ourselves and to do something about it, to work toward healing? Because the truth is, it's much more comfortable to stay with what's familiar, to stay where we are, to do what we know, especially if we've deemed it's not bothering anybody. It might be bothering ourselves, our little girl, who is still feeling unsafe. And the more we honor that behavior, the more we rehearse and respond in the same way, she can't feel safe because we're doing the same thing and perpetuating the lie. If we can put down the lie, then she can feel safe. Then we don't have to be afraid of the same things. We can trust God to, okay, God, this is scary to me because I'm not used to dealing with this in this way. I'm not used to having these kind of conversations with people that I know they're not going to react to. But think of the many things we don't say. That's why I talk about courageous conversations, because in life, conversations are hard because we don't know what the response is going to be and we're afraid it'll be negative, or it's hard to say because we think we might hurt the other person or they might lash out and hurt us. Just very simplistically put, there's things that people don't want to talk about. Well, why don't you want to talk about them? And it's two-sided. Obviously, a conversation is a two-way street. So not having any control of what the other person's response is going to be is part of what makes us nervous. But what if? This is hard to say, but I can't not say it. Even if it's about ourselves. I've been doing some of that kind of work in myself, and I had to have one of those conversations. Oh, I don't want to say this. I don't want to admit this. I felt so bad about something I had done. And even the way the whole thing played out, it didn't even, as I walked away, I didn't even have any ownership for what my part was in it. I thought, oh, that person's tripping. Oh, they're just lashing out at me because we believe different things about this, that, and the other. And at the end of the day, I was able to have enough healing to my heart to look back and say, wow, the way I spoke to you, the way I acted, what I talked about with you must have been really mean and painful. I just thought I was venting. I thought I was just naming my opinion, never considering how it made the other person feel. It's those kinds of things. In scripture, it's unwholesome talk because it's not beneficial to the person hearing it. It didn't build them up. I'm responsible for that. I stand before God accountable for that. And it was tied to anger and rage in my heart. All of this references back to Bible verse in Ephesians 4:29 through 31. Those words have stung, but they had to cause me to look and say, what am I saying? How am I saying what I'm saying? And what impact does it have? Not just on me coming out of my mouth, which is one part of it, but what on the hearer, whether it's even the person I'm talking to or not. A lot of times it's a bystander that is impacted. When you get to training at work for harassment training, it doesn't have to be to the person that's being talked to, even if it affects somebody listening. So if that's true in the workplace, surely in the sight of God, what we say, all the more so. So our reasons for getting to what those things are that makes our little girl react in ways where we lash out, in ways that we hold on to anger and rage and slander and bitterness and jealousy and competition against each other women especially. What does that come from? It comes from not feeling good enough. It comes from not trusting other people, not being safe around other people. You have to decide for yourself what that is. But I challenge you, I encourage you to take the challenge to look deeply, to see what that thing is. Do we have the courage to seek our healing, even though it feels painful at the time? When you have an injury, it hurts at the moment, but when it's healed, the pain is gone. If you have to have a surgery or put medication on it, it burns at that moment, or the recovery process of healing even hurts physically in our body for a time. But when the healing is done, now you can touch it, you can jump on it, and you can be good as new. In this walk, in getting our little girl from the very first stages of those things that hurt her, that changed her perspective of herself and the world around her, we revisit those only for the purpose of getting them healed. Not to hang on and perpetuate that belief system. In the middle of the word belief is the word lie. So we want to make sure what's in the middle of our beliefs is not a lie, but the truth. Because there's work for us to do. There's things that we haven't yet tapped into to even try to do. Places to go, people to meet, food to try. Who knows? We're limited by our own limiting belief. That's why it's called limiting. We're in this little tiny box. I heard somebody preach once and they talked about a little girl on a swing and just having the greatest time ever. And the story was a reflection of the parent saying, "Come on." But the parent was standing in for Jesus saying, "Come on, come here. There's more to the playground." And she was like, "No, I'm good here. I'm good here." Until finally she goes around the corner and there's this giant slide. And that's even more fun. We don't know what we're missing, that God wants us to experience the love and the grace and the healing if we don't let go of what feels fun and good right now. When you had a bike with training wheels, that was the best thing ever until you had a 10 speed and you could adjust the gears and climb hills and go down hills. You just knew what you knew at the time. Do you trust yourself enough to give your capped knowledge, rip that cover off and ask God to show you, what else is there? What more do you have for me? And who do you have for me to touch in this world? Whose life have I been created to change? What message have you put in my mouth, my pen, my song, my recipe, all the different ways that we can have impact on people's lives? What ministry is in me? What skills and talents have you blessed me with? What gifts have you imparted to me that I can't even see to get to be able to share because I'm holding on to my little girl beliefs? I'm not a little girl anymore. I want to have little girl energy. I want to have little girl joy, but I want to have adult reasoning. When I was a child, I thought as a child, but as an adult, when we are whole, we will see him face to face. From 1 Corinthians 13. We don't want to miss out. I don't want to miss out. And there's more for you than you could ever imagine. Don't miss out. Don't miss out without even knowing you're missing out because you've been too afraid to look. The beauty is, as God was with us all the way up to this point, he'll be with us where he takes us forward. We don't have to just stay as we are right now. We don't have to just do what we've always done. Imagine, I'm a person who can eat the same thing every day for a week if I really like it, or whatever, and my favorite foods. But what if I never tasted anything else and found out, oh my gosh, this is so much better? I love food, so you can get me excited just thinking about that. But anything that you did one way before, you knew how to do it a new way. Before we ran, we walked. Before we walked, we crawled. And of course, we may not have consciously thought about it, but as babies, it's like, hey, I can get around. I'm crawling. But when we could run, whew, if we could drive, I was so excited to drive. I dreamed about driving. That little vivid imagination. I was dreaming about fighting and driving, not at the same time, but in that same time span. The things that I saw ahead of me that were better. It was better to drive than to walk. Better to drive than to catch the bus. Even ride my bike. I loved riding my bike. Felt like flying. Even when I got hit by a truck on my bike. It was a love that I had that I would not have experienced if I never tried something different than walking, different than running. So I encourage you, take that time, ask yourself those hard questions, ask God to reveal to you, what am I afraid of? And how is it holding me back from what you want me to do? Your little girl wants to really feel safe, and she doesn't feel safe until you do. You are still influenced by your little girl's lies if you don't address them, if you don't dig into what made them happen and stick so close to you. Of course, comfortability is a part of it. Of course, familiarity is a part of it. How do you get uncomfortable? How do you make the uncomfortable comfortable? People talk about that in growing businesses and all that, and doing those things to get where you want to go that are different than what you're used to. Get uncomfortable with being, get comfortable with being uncomfortable. I keep saying it backwards because I'm get comfortable with being uncomfortable so that you will step out of your tiny little space, your tiny little zone. There's a whole world out there. There's people out there that you have a message for. Will you be courageous enough to take the steps to get there? I really hope you do. I hope this helps you get there. I hope this helps you as you're in your process so that you can open up all that God has for you, because you're also keeping yourself from the blessings that you've yet to experience, yet to receive, yet to have bestowed upon you. Can't just stay over here when all of this and what's over here is available to you. Take the chance, take the plunge. Baby steps to start, but once you start, just like running, you may start a little slow, but you'll pick up the pace. We're also building new muscles, right? When you work out, you got to start small and you keep adding on and adding on and adding on until you get stronger and in better shape. For the joggers of the world, I am not one of them. You start a short distance and you keep adding on. And every time you add more, your capacity increases. We want our capacity to increase to do the things we've been created to do. Let go of the limits because you're safe in God. You can do things you never imagined. He wants us to do exceedingly abundantly above all we can ask or think. We can't even imagine it. Therefore, we also can't control it. And that's okay. We don't need to because He's in control. Being able to trust God is a thing that I know people struggle with because you might have grown up with adults that you couldn't trust, that harmed you, that twisted reality in front of you, for you, to you, about you. This because of their own brokenness, because of their own hurt. How do you forgive them and forgive yourself so that you can let go to move on and move forward? It's here for you. It's here for all of us. Bit by bit, moment by moment. But once you start, don't look back. Don't go back. Don't retreat back to those things that once you're free from them, if you're truly free from them, you won't want to go back. You'll ask for the courage to stay. You'll ask for the courage not to revert back. The familiar only feels good because you don't know any better. The familiar feels good when you haven't considered any other options. Whether it's a relationship, I'm going to stay with this person because they're familiar, even if I know they're not the best for me. They don't bring out the best in me. I don't bring out the best in them. I've been in relationships where I saw myself be just the ugliest. And I couldn't even believe it. And it was only with that person. And I would have stayed for the familiar, for the image, for what it looked like outside. But it wasn't good. We're willing to stay with what's not good because it's familiar. I thank God for getting past that. I'm in a place, where sometimes and when you get past, you might feel like you're in that in-between place. I don't know. I knew that. I don't want to be that anymore. I don't want to do that anymore. I don't want to believe that anymore. Now I'm in this new place. I don't know what's next. Just marinate in the in-between. Be open to what God wants to show you, what He wants to give you insight and feelings about, intuition, inspiration. Through quiet times, through worship, through prayer, through journaling. There's so many ways that space can get filled. Fill it with things that are healing, how you take care of yourself so that you can be ready to minister, so that you can be ready to be available to others. Not all just giving out and filling it back up with noise and activity just to be busy, but to figure out with intentionality, what should I be doing? What is the priority for me now? What is most important for me today? And it's a daily question to ask and to wait and be still and get the answer to. We forget to wait for the answer when we ask a question. As a teacher in the classroom, we call it, you have to build in wait time. I being trained for that and training other people. You have to build in the wait time for yourself to hear from God when you ask those questions too. We get uncomfortable with silence. People get nervous, they laugh, they just make noises, they crack a joke. Silence is okay. God has been having me in a time of silence to just let my nervous system know it's okay. You don't need noise. You don't even need worship music sometimes. Just be in quiet. And it's a good thing. So ladies, we're going to look at that under that iceberg. We're going to look at those familiar things that we're holding on to in spite of what's good for us. We're going to ask a courageous conversation. Am I willing to do what it takes to step into healing? Am I willing to let go of the familiar and spend a moment in the unfamiliar to be still and quiet and get comfortable with it so that God can show us what we're to do, to be, and most of all, those we are to touch. I'm so excited to continue on this with you. Give me your feedback. Is this making sense? Does this resonate for you? Give me a thumbs up, a word in the comments. Share it with somebody you know who can relate to this. Because I know I'm not alone. I know you're not alone. We're building this community. More to come on that. I've got a big announcement coming. I'm just waiting till things are ready. I'm working on a lot of things at once because God has got me feeling this urgency. It's time. It's time to create space for healing in this way. Thank you for joining. I'll see you next time.
Thank you for watching Stacy Speaks Hope. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and share. To schedule a free coaching call, the link is in the description.
Grown woman, holding in story she needs to tell what God really wants you to do in this world. In His name, hope to break free from the shackles and the lies that have become your truth and put blinders on your eyes. You built walls around your heart. You have plugged up your ears. Get freedom to hope's what you need. It's in reach. Wipe your